Okay, Tom. Um, do you consider yourself a leader?
When I'm in Guatemala with the volunteers, I definitely feel like I'm a leader.
Yeah. Do you feel like you're a visionary?
Yes, I guess I do. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so at what time did that start? How did you all of a sudden, after, most of your adult life, start doing something that, to help people in another country? What would make you, propel you into that kind of work?
Well, I have a very clear memory of when I was 42, and the first time I had been volunteering in Guatemala, having a sleepless night in this village called San Jose de Masaya. And I think that would really be the beginning of the Stove Project for me, in my consciousness anyway.
But you were volunteering there, so you were already. What brought you then? I guess we should start at the beginning. What brought you to Guatemala, of all the places that could use help from volunteers and money from the Western world?
The first time I was in Guatemala was in 1985, and I was volunteering for a group called Peace Brigades. And a neighbor of mine, where I live out in Brook Valley, used to be the president of Peace Brigades Canada, Hans Sin. So I had found out from Hans about Peace Brigades, and I went and spent just 2 weeks volunteering in Guatemala City. What Peace Brigades wanted was, they're still there in Guatemala, and they're in a lot of other sort of very violent places like Colombia. They wanted some foreigners to Guatemala to accompany people who are in political danger, because they were safer by having someone who's not Guatemalan accompanying them. So if something happened to them, then we could phone embassy or different people.
Like a bodyguard kind of a thing?
Sort of, yeah.
Okay.
Not that we'd actually be wrestling with anybody, but just as the police or the army or someone took them away, we would phone, we'd contact other people.
Okay.
So the group that they were mostly supporting was called Grupo Apoyo Muertos, or GAM, G-A-M, and they were mostly widows of people who had disappeared during the 1980s and the Civil War in Guatemala. So I got to accompany 2 different indigenous women, but one of the other women I accompanied is now governor in Guatemala.
Okay, so you had a sleepless night? Is that when you had your sleepless night?
No, that was quite a few years later. That was in '86 or '85 when I volunteered for Peace Brigades, and it would have been, do the math now, 23. It would have been in 1999, so it would have been 14 years later.
Okay.
When I was in, so anyway, it was from my initial experience of being in Guatemala that I realized it was such an indigenous country, because I had traveled in Mexico, but I'd never seen, my first trip into Guatemala, just I'm sure you felt the same way when you first came there, just seeing so many people in indigenous clothing, and just being aware that you really are in a different culture, a non-Western, Mayan culture.
Something drew you to that?
Yes.
What do you think it was?
It still does, this sense of this very strong culture that's not going away, this ancient Mayan culture that's still very much alive in Guatemala. And Guatemala is the heartland of the Maya. It's the center of the Maya. There are Maya in Mexico and other Central American countries, but Guatemala is the center of the Mayan culture.
And had anything else in your life previous to that prepared you or pointed towards that you would be so drawn to an indigenous culture, so drawn to help them, so drawn to be part of it?
When I was 13 years old, I went with a family trip to Mexico. And I remember this, my mother and father and brothers and sisters. We went to this fancy Catholic cathedral near Mexico City, but out in the country. And we went inside, and the inside was all lined with gold. It was incredible, you know. So it was real gold too. The inside was out. And then when we went out of the cathedral, there was a group of lepers. They still have in Central America. Lepers are still there. So these people, you know, their noses had fallen off. It just looked awful. They were like in dirty old rags. And just the contrast just blew me away. After just being inside that cathedral that was all lined with gold, and then going outside and seeing these people that were
Wow, and how old were you?
13.
13.
And the other impression I had on that trip is we stayed in nice hotels, and it was when we were in Mexico City and other places, and so we'd be up on the 10th floor in Mexico City, and you could look out over the rooftops, and there were all these people living on the rooftops, like poor people living on the rooftops, and they'd have chickens and be making tortillas, and so the contrast there too was quite exceptional.
And do you think that in some way that changed how you saw humanity after that, or pointed you in a certain direction? That it obviously stayed with you.
Yeah, it did. It really has affected me, for sure. I still, it's strange, but for most people, when they see a really wealthy, affluent place, like a real big mansion, many people think that's very beautiful, but it still rankles me when I see, you know, exorbitant wealth being displayed. And how can anybody live like that when so many people have nothing?
Okay. So you're a man with a social conscience.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you were to step outside yourself, so leave your ego at the door, can you describe Tom Clarke to me?
Well, it's a long story now.
Well, give us a little synopsis.
Road.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, who is Tom?
I was the youngest child. I have an older brother and 2 older sisters. Youngest of 4. My dad was a medical doctor, and my mom was an occupational therapist and a mother. And when I was 17 years old, I became sort of disenfranchised with society. I guess that was back in the 60s. I guess the early 70s.
How old are you now?
55. So I went into British Columbia, this area I knew, and camped by myself in the woods for 5 months. I actually went, I had to cross a stream, like walk through a stream to get to this place. This is in the Chetzaltenango of British Columbia. And when I crossed the stream walking there, there was still ice flowing out the river. And the day I left, 5 months later, it was the first snowfall of the fall. So I basically stayed there as long as I could until I was going to get
By yourself?
By myself, yeah. And that really affected me a lot. And while I was there, I read a lot of material about Mahatma Gandhi, and I thought, boy, what an incredible accomplishments he performed during his lifetime. So he's always been, and still is, a very inspirational figure for me.
Okay, well that's quite an unusual thing to do at that age. And what else would you say about the person that Tom is? If you had to describe yourself, your personality, who you are, what words would you use? You don't even have to put them in sentences.
Well, I have very strong opinions, and I'm not easy to get along with. I tend to be obsessed with whatever is going on at the time, so I sort of go from one obsession to another, I guess. And I also, I'd like to have lots of hard work to do. I like to be busy.
Physical work.
Yeah, physical particularly, yeah.
Don't you think that the leaders, people who have accomplished things in the world, are people who others might describe as a little odd, a little off-centered, people who are a bit obsessed? It takes that kind of obsession to push something forward. And so, you know, those qualities are not a bad thing. They're actually a good thing. As far as the Guatemala Stove Project, would you say that those qualities certainly initially have served you well? I mean, they've got people on board, got people there working and contributing.
Sure, they have definitely, and what's been a huge part of it is Rita, my wife, because she's been supporting me, and she's much more organized and practical than I am. So the two of us working together has worked very well.
Ah, so you have a good team.
That's right.
So
I rely on Rita a lot, for sure.
The Guatemala Stove Project. When was the first stove that you built?
Would have been in January 1999.
Okay, and why stoves? I know when I talked to Griselda, she told me the need among my people is so great. And I wonder why stoves, why you didn't, do something about hygiene or health or...
Well, it was in 1999 that I really found out about stoves. I went to volunteer with SEDAC, with Jose Yak.
Right.
And he had at that time funds to build 6 stoves, and he offered me the opportunity to go with Don Juan Puac, not Don Juan Hernandez, but a different Don Juan, to this small village called San Jose de Masaya to build these 6 stoves. And the first day or two when I was working in kitchens where they still had the open fire burning while we were building the stove, as I didn't know better. And I just got so sick from breathing that smoke. And then it really drove home to me what it must be like for these women that live there all of their lives every day in that smoke. It's how horrible it was. But I was also aware, when I did volunteer with Peace Brigades International, they're trying to make political space in the countries they work in so people can protest and there can be political change, which is a very noble pursuit, and it's necessary, and I think the work they do is great. But I was extremely frustrated by it because political change in places like Guatemala happens very slowly. I mean, here it is 30 years later, and politically it's not a lot different than it was then. And when you see all these children, you realize they're going to grow up and maybe live or die, but it's all happening quickly. And so I wanted to be involved in something that was more immediate, something that could actually help these kids and children that you meet when you're there, not something that could potentially make things better for another generation. I wanted something that could help people right away.
Okay, and so how did you go about starting?
After I came back in 1999, I wanted to go again in the year 2000, but SEDAC didn't have any funds to build any more stoves. So I was very fortunate. This Diane Pinder Moss, she was a reporter for the EMC, a local newspaper here. She did an article on stoves. And in that article, she interviewed me. I asked for donations, and from that one article, we received almost $4,000 in donations. So that was really the beginning of the project. So in 2000, I had $5,000 to go back with.
And that can build how many stoves?
25 stoves.
25 stoves.
In 2000.